Hey folks, Brian back with you again, and let's meditate together on Ephesians 3:19. Paul says there, that you may be filled up to all the fullness of God. And this is Paul's third petition for the Ephesian saints. He wants them to be filled up with all the fullness of God. Now, notice that this prayer will only be answered when the former petition is answered by God. And the former petition was that they would know the love of Christ. So as they comprehend the love of Christ, which is incomprehensible in its fullness, but as they go deeper and deeper into understanding the love of Christ, then they can be filled up to all the fullness of Christ. Now, this request for the Ephesians is absolutely incredible. I mean, think about it, that a puny little peon, a human being on planet Earth in the midst of this gigantic universe that we can't even comprehend, that we could be filled up with all the fullness of God. How do you even explain that? I think that's unexplainable. So Paul is not praying that we would become God. No, we'll never become God. There is one God and only one God. What he is praying is that we would be filled with God. It's kind of like going down to the beach and you take out your little sewing thimble and you fill up that sewing thimble with the ocean. That's what it's like for one of us to be filled up with all the fullness of God. Paul's praying that we would be filled with as much of God as our nature will allow. Now, first he prays that their capacity for God would expand by being strengthened with power through the Holy Spirit in the inner man in order that Christ would dwell in their hearts through faith. So make that nature expand. Then he prays it, they would comprehend the incomprehensible love of Christ, but they would go deeper and more solid with that knowledge of the love of Christ. And then thirdly, he prays that God would fill up every part of their soul until it overflows. In John 1:16, we read, "For of Christ's fullness we have all received, and grace upon grace." The fullness of God dwells in Jesus. Remember Colossians 2:9, "For in him all the fullness of the deity dwells in bodily form." All the fullness of God dwells in Jesus. So the more Christ dwells in our hearts by faith, the more we are going to be filled up with all the fullness of God. Now, to be filled with something really is to be dominated by that thing. If I'm filled with rage, then I'm going to be dominated by that rage. It's going to control me. It's going to overpower me. But if I am filled with God, I'm going to be dominated by God. And so that's the question we need to ask ourselves. Am I dominated by God? Am I filled with him? And you know what? This is real living. This is abundant living. And so I would just ask you to make this your prayer. Lord, make the fullness of Christ fill me until I am like him. Fill me with his love, his power, his mercy, and his holiness.